remarks and protests, and did it herself with great care, examining the dark green dress with its wide collar of pale Murata lace in the tall, narrow stand mirror. Lan's heavy gold ring lay in her pouch. Best not to think of that. Alongside one of the twisted ring terengrial, and the great serpent gleamed golden around the third finger of her right hand. Her right hand. Best not to think of that either. The high ceiling was quite pleasantly painted in blue sky and white clouds, and if the furnishings stood on disconcertingly large gilded lion feet, and the slim bedposts and chair legs and everything else vertical had too much fluting and gilding for her taste, it was still a more comfortable room than she had stayed in for some considerable time. A pleasant room, moderately cool. What she was trying to do was calm herself. It did not work, of course. She had felt Saidar being woven, and as soon as she stepped from her bedchamber, she saw the ward against eavesdropping Elaine had made and tied off around the sitting room. Birgitta and Avienda were already there as well, all of them freshly scrubbed and dressed. In what Birgitta claimed was a rather ordinary arrangement here, 4 bedchambers flanked the one sitting room, which also had a ceiling painted as sky and clouds. 4 tall arched windows opened onto a tiny balcony of white painted wrought iron.
Hey, Soy. Hey, Fire. I hope y'all doing good. I have the camera on in just a sec. I'm just throwing a grub real quick. And I want to torture you guys with me eating. I never appreciate you two stopping by.
Tom and Julian had been given a room somewhere deep in the servants' quarters.
Hell yeah, Fire.
Which in truth seemed to irritate Elaine more than
I'll join you at the bowl in just a second.
Tom had actually laughed, but then he could afford to. Have some of this excellent tea, Nynaeve, Elaine said, laying a white napkin across gleaming blue silk skirts. Like everything else in the sitting room, her wide chair had gilded balls for feet, and more standing along the tall back above her head. Avienda sat by her side, but on the floor, legs folded beneath the skirt of a high-necked dress that almost matched the pale green tile. Her labyrinthine silver necklace.
I hope you all are doing good today.
Nynaeve did not think
or this evening, should I say?
Sit in a chair once. People had certainly stared at her in those 2 inns. Mint and cloudberries, Birgitta added to Elaine's offer, filling another delicate golden porcelain cup without waiting. Birgitta wore wide gray trousers and a short blue coat. She did wear dresses occasionally, but her taste made Nynaeve glad it was seldom. All 3 of them dressed and primped, and no one wanted them. The silver pitcher glistened damply, and the tea was cool and refreshing. Nynaeve admired Elaine's face, cool and dry. She herself already felt moist again despite the breeze. I must say, she muttered, I expected to.
How's everyone's weekend been so far?
Did you really? Elaine asked. After the way Van Deen and Adelius treated us? Nynaeve sighed. Very well then. I hoped. I am finally Aes Sedai, really Aes Sedai, and nobody seems to believe it. I truly hoped leaving Salidar would make a difference. Their meeting with Merlilla Sian Devon had not gone well. Their presentation to her, in truth. Van Deen's introduction had been almost perfunctory, and then they were dismissed, sent away so the real Aes Sedai could talk. Merlilla had said she was sure they wanted to freshen up, but it was a dismissal, with the choice of going like obedient accepted, or refusing like sulky children. Just remembering ruined all Nynaeve's attempts at calm. Sweat began to run down her face. Being sent away was not the worst of it, really. Merlilla was a slender, palely elegant Kyrianan with glossy black hair and
no shit, Soy.
Eyes. A grey who looked as if
Needs to
nothing
keep
had
you
ever
busy.
surprised her, and nothing ever could.
But definitely cheers to you too, Soy. I always appreciate it when you stop by.
Sedai, and wider still on learning Egwene was the Amelin seed. Birgitta as a warder clearly astounded her, though by that time she managed to hold her reaction to one stare and a brief tightening of her lips. Avienda came out of it the easiest. Merlilla gave her only a murmur about how much she would enjoy being a novice. Then came the dismissal, and a suggestion, more in the nature of a command, that they spend several days recuperating from the rigors of their journey. Nynaeve plucked her handkerchief from her sleeve and fanned her face uselessly with the lacy square. I still think they're hiding something. Really, Nynaeve, Elaine said, shaking her head. I do not like how we're being treated any more than you, but you are trying to make a bull out of a mouse. If Vandene and Adelius want to look for runaways, let them. Would you rather have them trying to take over looking for the bold? During the whole journey, they had hardly mentioned the ter'angreal they sought, for fear the pair would do just that. Whether they would have or not, Nynaeve still thought they were hiding things. Elaine just did not want to admit it. Adelius had not realized that Nynaeve had overheard that remark about looking for runaways once they reached Ebou Dar, and when Nynaeve asked whether they really expected to find any, Vandene replied just a bit too quickly that they always kept an eye out for young women who would run from the tower. It did not make sense. No one had run away from Salidar, but novices did run sometimes. The life was hard, especially with years of obedience to look forward to before you could even think of thinking for yourself. And an occasional accepted who had begun to despair before reaching the shawl tried to slip away. Yet even Nynaeve knew that few made it off the island of Tar Valon, and almost all.
I hope you're doing good. I just have my camera on right now because I'm
for not being strong
just throwing it real quick, real quick.
Refusing or failing your test for accepted, or the test for Aes Sedai that she and Elaine had slipped by. But leaving was never your decision unless you wore the shawl. So, if successful runaways were so rare, why did Vandene and Adelius think they might find one in Ebou Dar? And why had they shut up like mussels when she asked? She was afraid she knew the answer to the last anyway. Not tugging her braid required considerable self-control. She thought she was becoming better at that. At least Mat finally knows where Aes Sedai, she growled. At least she could deal with him now. Let him try anything, and he would see what it was like being thumped with everything she could wrap a flow around. He had better. Is that why you've been avoiding him like a Chelton flinching from the tax collector? Birgitte asked with a grin, and Nynaeve felt her face coloring. She thought she had hidden her feelings better than that. He is very irritating even for a man, Aviendha murmured. You must have traveled very far, Birgitte. You often speak of places I have never heard of. One day I would like to travel the wetlands and see all these strange places. Where is this Chelton? Chelta? That wiped Birgitte's grin right off. Wherever it was, it might be dead 1,000 years, or since an earlier age altogether. Her and her slipping ancient places and things into the conversation. Nynaeve wished she had been there to see her admit to Egwene what Egwene already knew. Egwene had grown impressively forceful in her time with the Aiel, and put up with little she considered nonsense. Birgitte had actually come back looking chastened. Even so, Nynaeve liked Birgitte rather better than she did Aviendha, who made her very uneasy at times with her hard stares and bloodthirsty talk. And however irritating Birgitte could be, Nynaeve had promised to help her keep her secret. Mat threatened me, she said hurriedly. It was the first way that came to mind to divert Aviendha, and the last thing she wanted anyone else to know. Her cheeks heated all over again. Elaine actually smiled, though she had the grace to hide it in her teacup. Not like that, Nynaeve added, when Aviendha began frowning and fingering her belt knife. The Aiel woman seemed to think the proper response to everything was a violent one. It was just... Aviendha and Birgitte looked at her, all ears and interest. He just said, as she had rescued Birgitte, Elaine rescued her. I really think that is enough about Master Coulson, Elaine said firmly. He is only here to pull him out of Egwene's hair, and I can puzzle out what to do about the ter'angreal later. Her lips compressed for a moment. She had not been happy when Vandene and Adelius began channeling at Mat, without so much as a by your leave, and even less when he slipped off to that inn. There had been nothing she could do, of course. She claimed that by only telling him to do what he had to do anyway in the beginning, she could bring him into the habit. Well, good luck to her. He is the least important part of this trip, she said, even more firmly. Yes, Nynaeve just kept the relief out of her voice. Yes, the bowl is what's important. I suggest I scout about first, Birgitte said. Ebou Dar seems rougher than I remember, and the district you described could be rougher than... She did not quite glance at Avienda. Then the rest of the city, she finished with a sigh. If there is scouting to be done, Avienda put in eagerly, I wish to be part of it. I have a cut-in sore. A scout is supposed to blend in, Elaine said gently. I think we should find Ebou Dari dress for all of us. Then we can all search together from the start, and none of us will stand out. Though Nynaeve will have the easiest time of it, she added, smiling at Birgitte and Avienda. The Ebou Dari they had seen so far all had dark hair, and most seemed to have nearly black eyes. Avienda exhaled glumly, and Nynaeve felt like echoing her, thinking of those deep necklines. Very deep, however narrow. Birgitte actually grinned. The woman had no shame at all. Before the discussion could go any further, a woman with short black hair, in the livery of House Mitsobar, entered without knocking, which Nynaeve thought rude, Elaine said was proper for servants. Her dress was white, the skirt sewn up the knee on the left side to expose a green petticoat, with a stud bodice embroidered on the left breast with a green anchoring sword. Even the livery's narrow neckline plunged as far as Nynaeve recalled. Plump and somewhere in her middle years, the woman hesitated, then curtsied and addressed herself to everyone. Queen Thailand wishes to see the Three Aes Sedai if it pleases them. Nynaeve was wondering looks with Elaine and the others. There are only 2 of us Aes Sedai here, Elaine said after a moment. Perhaps you meant to go to Morlilla? I was directed to this apartment, Aes Sedai. The pause was barely long enough to notice, and the woman just missed turning the title into a question. Elaine rose, smoothing her skirts.
Let's do it, Dad.
No stranger would suspect that smooth face hid anger, but there was a hint of tightness at the corners of eyes and mouth. Shall we go, then? Nynaeve? Avienda? Birgitte? I am not Aes Sedai, Elaine, Avienda said, and the serving woman put in hurriedly, I was told only the Aes Sedai. Avienda and I could have a look around the city while you did Birgitte said, before Elaine could open her mouth. Avienda's face lit up. Elaine gave the pair of them a sharp look, then sighed. Well, at least be careful. Nynaeve, are you coming? Or do you want to see the city, too? That last was in a dry tone, with another glance at Birgitte. Oh, I would not miss it, Nynaeve told him. It will be good to finally meet someone who thinks... She could not finish it with the maid there. We should not keep the queen waiting. Oh, no, the liveried woman said. It'd be as much as my ears are worth. However much her ears were worth, it took some time to walk through the palace corridors, as though to make up for all the work inside. The palace was full of color. In one corridor, the ceiling was painted green and the walls blue. In another, the walls were yellow and the ceiling pale rose. The floor tiles were diamonds of red and black and white, or blue and yellow, or almost any combination in any shade. There were very few tapestries, usually scenes of the sea, but a good many tall vases of golden sea folk porcelain stood in arched niches, and also large carved crystal, statuettes, and vases and bowls that caught Elaine's eye as well as Nynaeve's. Of course, servants scurried about everywhere, the men's version of the livery entailing white breeches and a long green vest over a white shirt with wide pleated sleeves. But before they had gone very far, Nynaeve saw someone striding toward them who made her stop and catch Elaine's arm. It was Jaqen Caridin. She did not take her eyes off the tall, graying man as he strode on past them, those cruel, deep-set eyes never turning in their direction, white cloak spreading behind him. Sweat covered his face, but he ignored it as he ignored them. What is he doing here? Nynaeve demanded. That man had unleashed slaughter in Tanchico, and the light only knew where else. The serving woman looked at her. Why, the children of the light sent an emissary. The queen. Again, that hesitation. Elaine managed to nod graciously, but Nynaeve could not blank the asperity from her own voice. Then we should not keep her waiting. One thing Marilla had let slip about this Tylin was that she was a punctilious woman, stiffly formal. But if she too started doubting they were Aes Sedai, Nynaeve was in just the mood to prove it. The serving woman left them in a large room with a pale blue ceiling and yellow walls, where a row of tall, triple-arched windows gave onto a long wrought-iron balcony that lay in a quite comfortable solitude. And before the queen, Nynaeve and Elaine made their curtsies, proper for Aes Sedai to ruler, a slight dip, a tiny bow of the head. Tylin was a most impressive woman, no taller than Nynaeve. She stood with a regal bearing that Elaine would have had to strain to match on her best day. She should have replied to their courtesies with the same, but she did not. Instead, her large black eyes examined them with imperious intensity. The favor as well as she could. Waves of glossy black hair, gray at the temples, hung well below Tylin's shoulders, framing a face that was handsome if not unlined. Shockingly, there were 2 scars on the woman's cheeks, fine and so old they had all but vanished. Of course, she did have one of those curved knives stuck through a belt of woven gold, with hilt and scabbard encrusted in gems. Nynaeve was sure it must be for show. Tylin's blue silk dress was certainly nothing other than before riding a dew. Balls of snowy lace that would nearly hide her fingers if she lowered her hands, and skirts drawn up above her knees in front to expose layers of green and white silk petticoats, and trailing behind her a pace or more. The bodice, trimmed in the same lace, was snug enough that Nynaeve was not sure whether sitting up would be more uncomfortable. A collar of woven gold fastened around the gown's high neck, which put more lace under her chin, supported a white-sheathed marriage knife, hanging head down into an oval cutout that easily equaled any of those deep necklines. You two must be Elaine and Nynaeve. Tylin took a chair carved to resemble bamboo, though covered in gilt, and arranged her skirts carefully without taking her eyes from them. Her voice was melodious and commanding. I understood there was a third, Aviendha. Nynaeve exchanged glances with Elaine. There had been no invitation for them to sit, not so much as a flicker of eyes toward a chair. She is not Aes Sedai, Elaine began calmly. Tylin spoke before she could say more. And you are? You've seen 18 winters at most, Elaine. And you, Nynaeve, staring at me like a cat with its tail caught. How many have you seen? 22, 23, perhaps? Stab my liver. I visited Tar Valon once. I doubt any woman your age has ever worn that ring on her right hand. 26, Nynaeve snapped. With a good part of the women's circle back in Enham's Field thinking she was too young to be wisdom, it had become habit with her to flourish every name she could claim. I am 26 and an Aes Sedai of the Yellow Ajah. She still felt a thrill of pride saying that. Elaine may be 18, but she is Aes Sedai as well, and Green Ajah. Do you think Merlilla or Vandene would let us wear these rings as a joke? A good many things have changed, Tylin. The Amyrlin seat, Egwene Alvear, is no older than Elaine. Is she? Tylin said in a flat voice. I was not told that. When the Amyrlin counseled me from the day I took the throne, and my father before me abruptly leaves for the tower without explanation, and I then learned that rumors of the tower divided are true. When Dragonsworn seem to spring out of the ground, when an Amyrlin is chosen to oppose Elaida and an army gathered under one of the great captains inside Altara, before I hear of it, when all of that has happened, you cannot expect me to be enamored of surprise. Nynaeve hoped her face did not look as sickly as she felt. Why could she not learn to hold her tongue occasionally? Abruptly, she realized she could no longer sense the true source. Anger and embarrassment did not go together very well. It was probably to the good. If she could fail, she might make an even bigger fool of herself. Elaine moved to smooth things over without a pause. I know you have heard this before, she told Tylan, but let me add my apologies to those of Marilla and the others. Gathering an army inside your borders without your permission was unconscionable. All I can say in mitigation is that events moved quickly, and we in Salidar were caught up, but that is no excuse. I swear to you no harm is intended to Altara, and no insult was meant to the throne of the winds. Even as we speak, Gareth Bryn leads that army north, out of Altara. Tylan stared at her, unblinking. I have heard no apology or excuse until yours. But any ruler of Altara must learn to swallow insults from greater powers without salt. Taking a deep breath, she gestured, Lace waving. Sit. Both of you sit. Lean back on your knife and let your tongue go free. Her sudden smile was very close to a grin. I don't know how you say it in Andor. Be at ease, and speak your mind as you wish. Nynaeve was glad that Elaine's blue eyes widened in surprise because she herself gasped aloud. This was the woman who Merlin required ceremony carved in polished marble. Nynaeve was more than glad to take a chair. Thinking of all the hidden currents in Salidar, she wondered whether Tylan was trying to what? She had come to expect everyone who was not a close friend to try manipulating her. Elaine sat on the very front of her chair, and stiffly. I mean what I say, Tylan insisted. Whatever you say, I will hear no insult. From the way her fingers tapped the jeweled hilt at her waist, though, silence might be heard as one. I am not certain where to begin, Nynaeve said carefully. She did wish Elaine had not actually nodded at that. Elaine was supposed to know how to handle kings and queens. Why did she not say something? With why, the queen said impatiently. Why do 4 more eyes to die come to Ebudar from Salidar? It cannot be to outshine Elida's embassy. Teslin does not even call it that, and there are only her and Jolene. You did not know. Falling back in her chair, laughing, she pressed the fingers of one hand to her lips. Do you know about the White Cloaks? Yes? Her free hand made a slashing gesture, and her mirth began to subside in small ripples. That for White Cloaks. But I must listen to all who court me. Lord Inquisitor Caradin, as well as the others. But why?
Oh yeah, fire.
I am glad
That's what I'm doing, loading up my bowl.
But in that case, why must you listen to a word Caradin says? The man's a butcher. She knew she had made another mistake. The way Elaine suddenly seemed to be studying the broad white fireplace where the deep lintel was carved into towering waves told her that, even before the last vestige of Iron's laughter snuffed out like a candle. You take me at my word, the queen said quietly. I said let your tongue go free, and those dark eyes went to the floor tile, and she seemed to be gathering herself. Nynaeve looked to Elaine, of what she had done wrong, or better, how to make it right. But Elaine only gave her one sideways glance and the smallest shake of her head before returning to her study of the marble waves. Maybe she should avoid looking at Tylan too? Yet the woman staring at the floor drew her eyes. With one hand, Tylan stroked the hilt of her curved dagger. With the other, fingered the smaller hilt nestled between her breasts. The marriage dagger told quite a lot about Tylan. Vandene and Adelius had been more than willing to explain some things concerning Ebudar.
You know what, before I start this bowl.
Seem unsafe for anyone not surrounded by a dozen armored guards.
Let me do another dab real quick.
The was widowed and did not intend to remarry. The 4 pearls and 1 fire drop set in the gold-wrapped hilt said she had borne 4 sons and 1 daughter. The white enameled setting of the fire drop and the red enameled of 3 of the pearls said only 1 son survived. All had been at least 16 when they died, and died in tears, or the settings would have been black. What must it be like to constantly carry on? According to Van Dien, women saw a red or white setting as a source of pride, whether her stones were pearls and fire drops or colored glass. Van Dien said many Abu Ghari women removed the stones of their children past 16 who refused a duel and never acknowledged them again. At long last, Tylen raised her head. Her face was pleasant, and her hand left the dagger in her belt, but she continued to hold the carriage knife absently. This would be an hour in Anna, though we would have to be a woman. She actually grew up genuine amusement, or in any other land save Norway, where matters are much the same as here in Altara. In the 1,000 years since Arthur Hawkwing, only one house has held the throne for 5 generations, and Anarina's fall was so precipitous that to this day House Todand is a lapdog for anyone who wants them. No other house has ever had more than 2 rulers in succession. When my father took the throne, other houses had more of the city itself than Mitsuba. Had he stepped outside his palace without guards, he would have been sewn into a sack with rocks and tossed into the river. When he died, he gave me what I have now, small compared to other houses. A man riding fresh horses to reach the end of my writ in one day's hard ride. I have not been idle, though. When news of the Dragon Reborn came, I was certain I could hand on to Beslan twice what I hold, and allies of a sort beyond that. The Stone of Tyr and Kalendor changed everything.
Hell yeah, fire.
Nile when he arranges for Ilion to take a 100-mile swath of Altara.
Oh shit, hell yeah.
I listened to Jakin.
That's badass fire. Let's do one more dab before we get to that bowl.
I listened to Karadin and to Tesla and to
this wax is they have it listed as
drowned in my bath on the day Beslan meets with an accident hunting.
Turquoise gold.
The pleasant face remained, but an edge entered her face. Now, I have stood bare-breasted in the fish market for you. Answer me now. Why do I have the honor of 4 more eyes? We are here to find eternal beyond, Elaine said. And as Nynaeve stared in amazement, she told everything from Tel'aran'rhiod to the dust of the to make the weather right would be a miraculous blessing, Tylen said slowly. But the quarter you describe sounds like the Rahad across the river. Even the civil guard steps lightly there. Forgive me. I understand that you are Aes Sedai, but in the Rahad you could have a knife in your back before you knew it. If the clothes are fine, perhaps you should leave with Van Dien and Adelius. I think there are more years than you to see such places. I told you about the bowl, Nynaeve said with a frown, but the Queen shook her head. Only that they were here to search for something. Aes Sedai never tell a word more than they absolutely must. Sudden grin flashed. Quite merry, though it did make her scars show as
definitely a good dab on that one.
Cheeks. Until you two, at least. May the years not change you too much. I often wish Kavandra had not returned to the tower. I could talk with her in this way. Standing, she motioned them to remain seated and glided across the room to tap a silver gong with an ivory mallet. It produced quite a loud sound in such a small cylinder. I will send for cool mint tea and we will talk. You will tell me how I can help. If I send soldiers into the Rahad, it will be the wine riots all over again. And perhaps you will even be able to explain why the bay is full of seafolk ships that neither dock nor trade. A goodly time passed over tea and talk, mostly about the dangers of the Rahad and what Tylen could not do, and Beslan was brought in, a soft-spoken youth who bowed respectfully and stared with beautiful black eyes that perhaps felt relief when his mother said he could go. He
about to start this bowl finally. after a couple of
Finally,
dabs.
though, the pair of them were finding their way back to their apartment through the brightly painted corridors. So they need to take over the search, too, Nynaeve murmured, glancing about to make sure none of the liveried servants were close enough to hear. Tylen
We had to
known
put
too
it
much
out.
about them too soon.
It's always
And
good when
however
you got
she
some
knew,
dank stuff
she'd
that's
been upset
like
when
that.
Aes Sedai and Salidar. Elaine, do you think it was wise to tell her everything? She might decide the best way to make sure that boy gets the throne is to let us find the bowl and then tell Tesla. She remembered Tesla slightly, a red and an unpleasant woman. I know how my mother felt about Aes Sedai traveling about Andor, never letting her know what they were doing. I know how I would feel. Besides, I finally remembered being taught about that phrase, lean back on your knife and the rest. The only way to insult somebody who says that to you is to lie. Elaine's chin rose slightly.
Too much.
As for Van Deen and Adelius, they only think they've taken over. This Rahad may be dangerous, but I cannot think it is any worse than Tanchico, and we won't have the Black Ajah to worry about. I wager in 10 days we will have the bowl. I will know what makes Master Angreal do what it should not be able to do, and we will be on our way to join Egwene, with him knuckling his forehead as fast as Master Vanin, and Van Deen and Adelius will be left sitting here with Marilla and Tesla, trying to puzzle out what happened. Nynaeve could not help it. She laughed out loud. A lanky serving man shifting a large vase of golden porcelain stared at her, and she stuck out her tongue at him and dropped the vase. I won't take that wager, except about Matt. 10 days it is.
Chapter 49. The Mirror of Mists. Rand puffed contentedly on his pipe, sitting in his shirt sleeves with his back against one of the slender white columns that surrounded the small oval courtyard, and watched the water spray up in the marble fountain, sparkling like gems in the sunlight. The morning still left this part of the courtyard in pleasant shade. Even Lews Therin was still. Are you sure you won't reconsider Tyr? Seated against the next column, and also coatless, Therin blew 2 smoke rings before replacing his pipe, a rather ornate thing carved with wolf heads. What about what Min saw? Rand's attempt at his own ring ran afoul of a sour grunt and came off just a puff of smoke. Min had no right to bring that up where Perrin could hear. Do you really want to be tied to my belt, Perrin? What I want hasn't seemed to count much since the first time we saw Moraine back in Emond's Field, Perrin said dryly. He said, You are who you are, Rand. If you fail, everything fails. Suddenly he sat forward, frowning toward a wide doorway behind the columns to their left. A long moment later, Rand heard footsteps in that direction, too heavy for any human. The broad shape that ducked through the doorway and strode into the courtyard was more than twice as tall as the serving woman, who was almost running to keep up with the Ogier's long legs. Loial! Rand exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. He and Perrin reached the Ogier together. The grin on Loial's wide mouth really did almost split his huge face in two, but his long coat, spreading out above turned-down knee-high boots, still carried travel dust. The big pockets bulged with squarish shapes, too. Loial was never far from books. Are you all right, Loial? You look tired,
How you doing?
Perrin said, urging the Ogier toward
Just
the fountain.
listening to book
Sit on
and
the coping.
doing a little bit of smoking.
Loial let himself
How
be
you
led,
been doing?
but his long dangling eyebrows rose and tufted ears quivered in puzzlement as he stared from one of them to the other. Sitting, he was as tall as Perrin, standing.
All right. Tired?
His voice was a rumble like the earth moving.
Of course I'm all right. And if I'm tired, I've walked a long way. I must say it felt good to be back on my own feet. You always know where your feet are taking you, but you never can be sure with a horse. Anyway, my feet are faster.
Abruptly, he let out a thunderous laugh.
You owe me a gold crown, Perrin. You and your 10 days. I'll wager another crown you've not been here more than 5 days before me.
You'll get your crown, Perrin laughed. In an aside to Rand that had Loyal's ears vibrating indignantly, he added, "Gaul corrupted him. He dices now, and bets on horse races when he can barely tell one horse from another." Rand grinned. Loyal always had looked at horses rather dubiously, and small wonder since his legs were longer than theirs. "Are you sure you're all right, Loyal?" "Did you find that abandoned steady?" Perrin asked around his pipe stem. "Did you stay long enough?"
What are you two talking about?
Loyal's uncertain frown trailed the ends of his eyebrows down onto his cheeks.
I just wanted to see a steading again, to feel one.
Oh, yeah.
I am
Once
ready
it's
for
here, I'll do a dab.
"That
I
isn't
was
what your
smoking
mother
that,
says,"
but
Rand said seriously. Loyal was on his feet before Rand finished, staring wildly in every
gotta
direction.
shave. This
He
shit
was laid
itches
back
too
and
much.
trembling.
my mother? Here? She is here?
"No, she isn't."
It's called
Rand said,
turquoise
and
gold.
Loyal's ears almost went limp with relief. "It seems she's in the Two Rivers, or was a month ago." Rand had some way of hopping about he has to take her and Elder Hammond. "What's the matter?" Halfway to sitting down again, Loyal froze with his knees bent at Elder Hammond's name. Eyes closed, he lowered himself slowly the rest of the way. He muttered, rubbing his face with a thick-fingered hand.
Elder Hammond. Mother.
He peered at Perrin. He peered at Rand. In a voice that was low and much too casual, he asked,
Was anyone else with them?
Well, it was low for an Ogier. A giant bumblebee buzzing in a huge water jar. A young named Aerith. You. That was as far as it got. With a moan, Loyal leaped to his feet again. Servant's head peered to see what that vast noise was, and vanished again when they saw Rand. Loyal began pacing back and forth, ears and eyebrows both drooping so much that he seemed to be melting.
A wife, he mumbled. It cannot mean anything else. Not with Mother and Elder Hammond. A wife. I'm too young to get married.
Rand hid a smile behind his hand. Loyal might be young for an Ogier, but in his case, that meant more than 90.
She'll drag me back to studying Shangtai. I know she won't let me travel with you, and I still don't have near enough notes for my book. Oh, you can smile, Perrin. Fail does whatever you say.
Perrin choked on his pipe, wheezing until Rand slapped his back.
It is different with us.
Loyal went on.
It is considered very rude not to do as your wife says. Very rude. I know she'll make me settle down to something solid and respectable, like tree singing or...
Abruptly, he frowned and stopped pacing.
Did you say Aerith?
Rand nodded. Perrin seemed to be getting his breath back, but he was glaring at Loyal in a sort of malevolent amusement.
Aerith, daughter of Iva, daughter of Ayla?
Rand nodded again, and Loyal sank back to his place in the fountain coping.
But I know her. You remember her, Rand? We met her at Stedding Tsofu.
That was what I was trying to tell you, Rand said patiently, and with no little amusement himself. She was the one who said you're handsome, and gave you a flower, as I recall.
She might have said.
Loyal muttered defensively.
She might have done. I cannot recall.
But one hand strayed toward a coat pocket full of books, where Rand would have wagered anything that flower was carefully pressed. The Ogier cleared his throat, a deep rumble.
Aerith is very beautiful. I've never seen anyone so beautiful. And intelligent. She listened very attentively when I explained Ceridan's theory. That is, Ceridan, son of Colum, son of Radlin. He wrote about 600 years ago. When I explained his theory of how the waves...
He trailed off as if he had just noticed their grains.
Well, she did listen. Attentively. She was very interested.
I'm sure she was, Rand said noncommittally. Mention of the ways made him think. Most of the waygates were near Stedding, and if Loyal's mother and Elder Hammond were to be believed, the Stedding were what Loyal needed. Of course, he could not take Loyal any closer than the edge of one. You could not channel into a Stedding any more than you could channel inside one. Listen, Royal. I want to put guards in all the way gates. And I need somebody who can not only find them, but can talk to the elders as well and get their permission. Light, Perrin growled disgustedly. He tapped out his pipe and ground the dottle into the courtyard paving stone under his boot heel. Light,
I'll be coming up.
you send Matt off to face down Aes Sedai. You want to dump me into the middle of a war with Samael and a few hundred Two Rivers men with me.
There's Friday the 13th
And
and
now you want to send
Halloween.
Royal off when he's only just arrived. Burn you, Rand, look at him. He needs rest. Is there anybody you won't use? Maybe you want Fael to go hunt Moghedien or Semirhage. Light. Anger welled up in Rand, a tempest that made him shake. Those yellow eyes stared at him grimly, but he stared back like thunder.
I don't really celebrate Thanksgiving all that much.
You said it yourself. I am who I am. And I'm using myself up there because I have to, just like I'll use anybody I have to. We don't have a choice anymore.
And that's really one that
Not me, not
I don't
you,
really care
not
for all that
anybody.
much.
Rand, Perrin,
Royal murmured worriedly.
be still, be calm. Don't fight. Not you.
A hand the size of a ham patted each of them awkwardly on the shoulder.
You should both
Oh yeah,
rest
I
together.
definitely eat, but I don't celebrate it.
Instead are very peaceful, very soothing.
Rand stared at Perrin, staring at him. Anger still flashed in him, lightning flashes in a storm that would not quite die. Lews Therin's mutters rumbled fitfully far off. I'm sorry, he muttered, meaning it for both. Perrin made an offhand gesture, maybe meaning there was nothing to apologize for, maybe accepting the apology, but he did not offer one himself. Instead, his head swung toward the columns again, toward the door Royal had come through. Once more, moments passed before Rand heard running footsteps. Min dashed into the courtyard with a run. Ignoring Loyal and Perrin, she seized Rand's arms. They're coming, she panted. They're on their way right now. Easy, Min, Rand said. Calm yourself. I was beginning to think they were all taking to their beds like... What did you say her name was? Demira? In truth, he felt considerable relief, though Lews Therin's grumblings and wheezing laughter grew louder at the mention of Aes Sedai. For 3 days, Marana had appeared with 2 sisters each afternoon as regular as the finest clockmaker's art. But the visits had suddenly stopped 5 days ago without a word of explanation. Min had no idea why. He had been worried that they had taken offense enough at his rules to leave. But Min stared up at him with a face of anguish. She was trembling, he realized. Listen to me. It is 7 of them, not 3. And they didn't send me to ask permission or to let you know or anything. I slipped out ahead of them and galloped Wildrose the whole way. They mean to be inside the palace before you know they're here.
King-size papers, huh?
I heard Marana talking to Demira.
Yeah, that definitely take a little bit,
They need to
especially
reach the Grand Hall ahead of you. So
especially
you have to
if
come to
you're
them.
smoking
Is
it by
this
yourself.
do you think? Yeah.
How the balls usually go.
Women who could channel would hurt him badly, she had said. 7, Lews Therin whispered hoarsely. No, no, no. Rand ignored him. There was little else he could do. I don't know, Min said in an agonized voice. Rand was startled to realize the shine in her dark eyes came from unshed tears. Do you think I wouldn't tell you if I knew? All I know is they are coming and there is nothing to be afraid of, he broke in firmly. The Aes Sedai must really have frightened her for Min to be near crying. 7, Lews Therin groaned. I cannot imagine 7. Not at once, not 7. Rand thought of the fat little man hungry. Distance, not moving, certainly not toward him. He was not sure he dared come face to face with her again. There's no time to waste either. Jelani?
It seems like sometimes the
popped
the
out from
bowls
behind
get
the column
rewarded,
so suddenly
dabs
that Loyal's
do
ears
sometimes.
shot straight up. Min seemed to see the Ogier for the first time, and Perrin. She gave a start too. Jelani, Rand said. Tell Nandera I'm going to the Grand Hall, where I expect Aes Sedai shortly. She tried to maintain maintain a smooth face, and the beginnings of a self-satisfied grin made her cheeks seem even plumper. Rana has already gone to inform Nandera. Karkarn. Loyal's ears flickered in surprise at the title. Then would you tell Sulan to meet me at the dressing rooms behind the Grand Hall with my coat and the Dragon Scepter? Jelani's grin widened openly. Sulan has already gone running in her Wetlander dress as fast as a gray-nosed hare that sat on Sagata spines. In that case, Rand said, you can bring my horse.
No shit,
to the
hell
Grand
yeah.
Hall. The young maiden's jaw dropped, especially when Perrin and Loyal doubled over laughing. Min's fist in Rand's short ribs made him grunt. This is no joking matter, you thick-skulled sheep farmer. Marana and the rest were wrapping themselves in their shawls as though... Now listen to me. I will stand over to one side behind the column so you can see, and they cannot. And if I see anything, I'll make some sort of signal. You will stay here with Loyal and Perrin, he told her. I don't know what kind of signal you could make that I'd understand, and if they catch even a glimpse of you, they will know you warned me. She gave him one of those fist-on-hips glaring up through her eyelashes, sullen stares. And, to his surprise, she sighed and said, Yes, Rand, just as meek as milk water. That sort of thing from her made him as suspicious as it would have from Elaine or Avienda. But he had no time for digging if he was to be in the Grand Hall before Marana. Nodding, he hoped he did not look as uncertain as he felt. Wondering whether he should have asked Perrin and Loyal to keep her there, she would have loved that. He trotted all the way to the dressing rooms behind the Grand Hall with Jelani at his heels, muttering about whether the horse had been
No
checked.
shit.
So
Oh,
he
yeah.
was already there with the gold-embroidered red coat and the Dragon Scepter.
No, I mean, I've been doing a lot of, well, not a lot of, I barely got in
without the green and white tassel,
the new Assassin's Creed, so
and no carvings.
I've been playing that one a lot.
Rand felt to be sure the Angreal was in the pocket. It was, and he breathed more easily. The loose Theron still seemed to be panting anxiously. When Rand hurried through one of the lion-paneled dressing rooms into the Grand Hall, he discovered that everyone had been as quick
Sega
as
Saturday, and I haven't
Veiled towered at one
played
side,
one of those in a
with his
minute.
arms folded, while Mullane stood on the other.
The old school consoles are definitely good ones to play once in a while.
On one knee, under Nandera's watchful gaze, complete with spears and bucklers, horn bows cased on their backs, and full quivers at their hips. Only their eyes showed above black veils. Jelani ran to join one of those lines. Behind them, more Aiel crowded
Have an
among the
NES,
columns,
nice
men
fire.
and maidens.
Super Nintendo games are definitely some good ones too.
There were a number of grim faces, though. They could not be enjoying the thought of a confrontation with Aes Sedai, and not for fear of the power. However Mullane and the other wise ones might speak of it now, most Aiel had that ancient failure of the Aiel firmly fixed in their heads. Bashir was not there, of course. He and his wife were out at one of Bashir's training camps, and neither were any of the Andron nobles who flocked around the palace.
I used to have
I'm sure that Neon,
Retron 5.
and that entire lot
That
learned
played
the gathering as soon as it began.
the
They
Nintendo,
never missed an audience from the throne,
Super
unless they sent
Nintendo,
them away. Their absence could only mean that
Sega,
when they went to the Grand Hall, they had learned the reason to.
Farmercon, which
That
is
meant the Aes Sedai
like the
were already in the
Japanese
palace.
games.
Indeed,
I didn't
Rand
play
seated himself on the dragon
your
throne
Game
with
Boy
the dragon
games
scepter on his knee,
from your
Mistress Hartford,
original
stirring
Game
into
Boy
the
all the way up to your
looking
Game Boy
flustered,
Advance games.
unusual for her. Staring at him and all the Aiel with equal amazement, she said,
And it's all on one
I've sent
console.
servants everywhere to find you.
It just has
There
different
are
slots.
Aes Sedai. That was as far as she got before 7 Aes Sedai appeared in the wide doorway. Rand felt Luz Theron reaching
But
beside
I
him.
ended up getting rid of that one because
Rand took hold of it himself.
I needed
and
some
the torrent of
cash
fire
at the
and
time.
ice, filth and sweetness. As hard as he did the piece of Shonchen's spear. 7, Luz Theron mumbled darkly. I told them 3 and 7 come. They must be cautious. Yes, cautious. I said 3. Rand snapped back at the voice. Me, Randolph Thor. Luz Theron fell silent, but then the distant muttering began again. Glancing from Rand to the 7 women in their fringed shawls, Mistress Hartford apparently decided between was no place to be. The Aes Sedai received her first curtsy, Rand the second, and she walked with a good show of calm to one side of the doorway. When the Aes Sedai entered, though, forming a line abreast, she did slip out behind them with just a touch of haste. On each of her 3 visits, Marana had brought different Aes Sedai, and Rand recognized all but one of these, from Feodrin Harella on the right, her dark hair in a multitude of thin braids worked with brightly colored beads, to stout Belinda Nathanos on the left in her white-fringed shawl and white dress. They were all clothed in their Aja colors. He knew who the one he did not recognize must be. That coppery skin made me gracefully beautiful.
Oh, not lately, no.
Demira Arryn, the brown sister whom Min had reportedly taken to her bed. But she stood in the center.
The closest to
a pace ahead of the others.
a NES game that I played is one of the Super Mario Brothers, and that's mainly because I have a Nintendo
they all looked very
2DS,
for one moment they
kind of like squared,
passively, ignoring the Aiel.
excuse me, Nintendos that they got before they did the switches or the lights.
Forming an arrowhead.
I got the one that had the Super Mario Brothers on it. I've been playing that.
In his skin to tell him they had embraced Sidar. Every step,
it's a Super Mario 2. I think it's Super Mario 3. Because it has the feather to where you can fly.
Theron's incredulous laugh faded into mad giggles. Rand did not need the man's explanation. He had seen Moraine do something like this once. Asmodean had called it the Mirror of Mists, too, and also illusion. Mullane shifted her shawl irritably and sniffed loudly, but Bale suddenly looked as if he were facing, all alone, a charge by hundreds. He meant to stand against it, but he did not expect any good outcome. For that matter, some of the maidens stirred until Nandera glared at them over her veil, and that did not stop the soft sound of shifting feet from the Aiel among the columns. Demira Arif began to speak, and plainly channeling was involved there, too. She did not shout, but her voice filled the grand hall, seeming to come from everywhere. Under the circumstances, it was decided that I should speak for all. We intend you no harm here today, but the strictures we accepted before, that you would feel safe, we must now reject. Obviously, you have never learned the respect due Aes Sedai. You must learn it now. Henceforth, we shall come and go as we please, saving only that at our choice, we will still inform you first in the future when we wish to speak with you. Your Aiel watchers around our inn must be removed, and no one is to watch or follow us. Any future insult to our dignity will be punished, though those we must punish are his children, and you will be responsible for their pain. This is how it must be. This is how it shall be. Know that we are Aes Sedai. As that long arrowhead halted before the throne, Rand noticed Mullane glancing at him, frowning, no doubt wondering whether he was impressed. If he had not some notion of what was happening, he would have been. He was not sure he was not anyway. The 7 Aes Sedai stood twice as tall as Loyal, maybe more. It's nearly halfway to the vaulted ceiling with its colored glass windows. Demira gazed down at him, cool and dispassionate, as if she might be contemplating picking him up in one hand, which she appeared big enough to do. Rand made himself lean back casually, his mouth tightening when he realized that it had taken an effort, if not very great. Luce Theron chittered and screamed, but in the distance, something about not waiting, striking now. She had laid emphasis on certain words, as if he should understand the significance. Under what circumstances? They had accepted the restrictions before. Why were they suddenly a breach of respect? Why did they suddenly decide that far from needing to make him feel safe, they could threaten? Our emissaries in Cairhien accept the same constraints as you, and do not seem offended. Well, not very offended. Instead of vague threats, they offer gifts. They are not us. They are not here. We will not buy you. The contempt in Demira's voice stung. Rand's knuckles ached from his grip on the dragon scepter. His anger had an echo from Lews Therin, and suddenly he realized the man was struggling again to reach the source. Burn you, Rand thought. He meant to shield them, but Lews Therin spoke, panting in near panic. Not strong enough. Even with the Angreal, maybe not strong enough. Not to hold 7. You fool, you waited too long. Too dangerous. Shielding anyone did take a fair amount of strength. With the Angreal, Rand was sure he could make 7 shields, even with them embracing Sayadar already. But even if one could break that shield, or more than one, he wanted to impress them with his strength, not give them a chance to overcome it. But there was another way. Weaving spirit, fire, and earth just so, he struck almost as if intending to shield. Their mirror of mists shattered. Suddenly, there were only 7 normal women standing in front of him with stunned faces. Shock vanished behind Aes Sedai tranquility in an instant, however. You have heard our requirements, Demira said in a normal voice, but a commanding one, just as if nothing had happened at all. We expect them to be met. Rand stared in spite of himself. What did he have to do to show them he would not be browbeaten? Anxiety raged in him with boiling fury. He did not dare release it. Lews Therin was screaming maniacally now, trying to claw the source out of his grip. It was all he could do to hold on. Slowly he stood. With the extra height of the dais, he towered over them. 7 unruffled Aes Sedai faces looked up at him. The restrictions stand, he said quietly. And one more requirement of my own. From now on, I expect to see the respect I deserve from you. I am the Dragon Reborn. You may go now. The audience is at an end. For perhaps 10 heartbeats they stood there, not even blinking, as though to show they would not move a single slipper at his command. Then Demira turned without so much as a nod of her head. As she passed Sioned and Raphella, they fell in behind her, and the others in turn, all gliding smoothly, without hurry, across the red and white tiles, and out of the grand hall. Rand stepped down from the dais as they vanished into the corridor. The Karakan handled them well, Mullane said, loudly enough to be heard in every corner. They must be taken by the scruff of the neck and taught honor, though they weep for it. Bael did not manage to hide his discomfort, hearing Aes Sedai spoken of so.
Oh, shit.
Perhaps it is the way to handle wise ones, too? Rand asked, managing a smile. Mullane lowered her voice, shifting her shawl emphatically. Do not be a complete fool, Randall Thor. Bael chuckled, though his wife glared at him. At least he had brought a chuckle. Rand did not feel the humor of the small joke, though, and not because of the buffering of the void. He almost wished he had let Min come.
I'll be right back.
There were too many undercurrents here he did not understand, and he was afraid there were some he did not even see. What were they really after?
Closing the small door of the dressing room, Min leaned back against a dark lion-carved wall panel and drew a very deep breath. Fail had come for Perrin, and however much Loial had protested that Rand wanted her to stay there, he had crumpled before the simple truth that Rand had no right to make her stay anywhere. Of course, if Loial had had any idea of what she intended, he might have tucked her under his arm, quite gently of course, and sat there in the courtyard reading to her. The thing was, while she had heard everything, she had not seen very much, aside from Aes Sedai towering over throne and dais. They must have been channeling, which did tend to obscure the images and auras, but she had been so astounded she would not have noticed had any been present. By the time she recovered, they were no longer towering, and Demira's voice no longer boomed from every angle. Chewing her underlip, she thought furiously. There were 2 problems as she saw it. First, Rand and his demands for respect, whatever he meant by that. If he expected Marana to curtsy with her head to the floor, he was going to have a long wait, and in the meantime he'd surely put their backs up. There had to be some way she could smooth that over, if she could just see how. The second problem was the Aes Sedai. Rand seemed to think this was some sort of snit that he could end by putting his foot down. Min was not certain Aes Sedai had smiths, but if they did, she was sure this was something more serious. The only place to find out, though, was the Crown of Roses. Reclaiming Wild Rose at the forecourt stable, she trotted the bay mare back to the inn and handed her over to a big-eared stableman, with a request that the horse be rubbed down well and fed some oats. Her gallop to the palace had been just that, and Wild Rose deserved a reward for helping spike Rand's mother's scheme. From the cold fury in Rand's voice, she was not certain what would have happened had he suddenly learned out of a clear sky that 7 Aes Sedai were awaiting him in the Grand Hall. The common room of the Crown of Roses looked almost the same as when she had scuttled out through the kitchens earlier. Warders sat about at the tables, some playing dominoes or stones, others tossing dice. Almost as one, they glanced up as she entered, and recognizing her, went back to what they were doing. Mistress Cinchomine was standing in front of the wine-room door. No barrels of ale and wine stacked along the common room wall in the Crown of Roses, with her arms folded and a sour expression on her face. The warders were the only ones at the tables, and as a rule, warders drank little and seldom. Any number of pewter mugs and cups stood on tables, but Min did not see one of them touched. She did see a man who might be willing to tell her a little. Mahiro Shukosa sat at a table by himself, working tavern puzzles, the 2 swords he usually wore on his back propped against the wall in easy reach. With graying temples and a noble nose, Mahiro was handsome in a rugged sort of way, though certainly only a woman in love would have called him beautiful. In Kandor he was a lord. He had visited the courts of almost every land, traveled with a small library, and won or lost gambling with the same easy smile. He could recite poetry and play the harp and dance like a dream. In short, except for being Rafella's warder, he was exactly the sort of man she had liked before meeting Rand. Still liked, actually, when she could see them for thinking about Rand. Whether fortunately or unfortunately, Mahiro saw her in a way Min suspected might be peculiar to Kandor, as a sort of younger sister who occasionally needed someone to talk to, and a little advice, so she would not break her neck while sowing her wild oats. He told her she had pretty legs, would never think of touching them, and would break the neck of any man who did think of it without her permission. Deftly slipping the intricate iron pieces back together, he placed the puzzle on a stack of those already worked, and took up one from another stack as she sat down across from him. "So, Cabbage," he said with a grin, "back with your neck unbroken, not kidnapped, and not married." One day she was going to ask him what that meant. He always said it. "Has anything happened since I went out, Mahiro?" "You mean aside from the sisters returning from the palace looking like a storm in the mountains?" As usual, the puzzle came apart in his hands as though channeled. "What upset them?" "Althor, I suppose." The puzzle went back together just as easily and joined the pile of discards. Immediately, one from the other pile did too. "I worked that one years ago," he confided. "But how, Mahiro? What happened?" Dark eyes regarded her. A leopard's eyes would look like Mahiro's if they were nearly black. "Min, a yearling who puts her nose into the wrong den may have her ears bitten off." Min winced. All too true. The fool things a woman did because she was in love. "That is what I would like to avoid, Mahiro. The only reason I'm here is to carry messages back and forth between Marana and the palace, but I walk in there with no idea what I'm walking into. I don't know why the sisters stopped meeting him every day, or why they started back, or why a whole fistful went today instead of just 3. I could get more than my ears bitten, not knowing. Marana isn't going to tell me. She doesn't tell me anything except go there, do that. Just a hint, Mahiro, please." He began studying the puzzle, yet she knew he was thinking, because the interlocked pieces shifted about in his long fingers, but nothing came loose. A motion at the back of the common room caught her eye, and she half turned her head before her neck froze. 2 Aes Sedai were coming back from the baths, by the freshly washed look of them. The last time she had seen that pair was months ago, before they were sent out from Salidar, because Shuriam had a hunch Rand was in the Aiel Waste somewhere. That was where Bera Harkin and Kiruna Nachiman had been headed. The Waste, not Caemlyn. Except for her ageless face, Bera would have looked like a farm wife with her brown hair cut close around a square face. But at that moment, that face was set in grim determination. Kiruna, elegant and statuesque, seemed every inch exactly what she was, sister to the king of Arafel, and a powerful lady in her own right. Her large dark eyes gleamed as if she was about to order an execution and enjoy it. Images and auras flickered about them, as always around Aes Sedai and warders. One caught Min's eye when it flashed around both women at the same time, brownish yellow and deep purple. The colors themselves meant nothing, but that aura made Min stop breathing. The table was not far from the foot of the stairs, but the two women did not glance at Min as they turned to climb. Neither had ever given her more than 2 looks in Salidar, and now they were engrossed in their own conversation. Alana should have brought him to heel long since. Kiruna's voice was low, yet close to open anger. I would have. When she arrives, I will tell her so, and the Dark One take convention. He should be leashed, Bera agreed in a flat tone. And before he can do more damage to Andor. She was Andoran. The sooner the better, I say. As the pair sailed up the stairs, Min realized Mahira was looking at her. How did they get here? She asked, and was surprised her voice sounded perfectly ordinary. Kiruna and Bera made 13. 13 Aes Sedai, and there was that aura. They followed word of Althor. They were halfway to Cairhien when they heard he was here. I would walk wide of them, Min. Their Gaideen tell me neither is in a good temper. Kiruna had 4 warders, and Bera 3. Min managed a smile. She wanted to dart out of the inn, but that would raise all sorts of suspicions, even in Mahira. That sounds good advice. What about my hint? He hesitated another moment, then set the puzzle down. I will not say what is or is not, but
hell yeah, fire.
Maybe you should expect Althor to be upset. Maybe you should even consider asking if someone else can deliver any messages. Perhaps one of us. He meant the warders. Maybe the sisters have decided to teach Althor a small lesson in humility. And that, Cabbage, is maybe a word more than I should have said. You will think on it? Min did not know whether the small lesson was what had happened at the palace or something to come, but it all fit
Hell
together.
yeah.
And that aura. That sounds
Nice,
good advice,
fire.
too. Mahira, if Marana comes looking for me to carry a message, will you tell her I am looking at the sights in the inner city for the next few days? A long journey, he chuckled, gently mocking. You will kidnap a husband yet if you are not careful. The big-eared ostler stared when Min insisted he root Wildrose out of her stall and saddle her again. She rode out of the stable yard at a walk, but as soon as the first turning hid the crown of roses, Min dug her heels and sent people leaping from her path as she galloped toward the palace as fast as Wildrose could carry her.
13, Rand said flatly, and just saying it was enough for Luce there to try seizing control of saidin from him again. It was a wordless struggle with a snarling beast. When Min first said there actually were 13 Aes Sedai in Caemlyn, Rand had barely managed to seize the power before Luce Theron could. Sweat rolled down Rand's face. There were dark patches on his coat. He only had room for concentrating on one thing, keeping saidin away from Luce Theron. A muscle in his cheek jumped from the strain. His right hand trembled. Min stopped pacing across his sitting room carpet and bounced on her toes. It isn't only that, Rand, she said frantically. It's the aura. Blood, death, the one power. Those 2 women and you. All in the same place at the same time. Her eyes were shining again, but this time tears leaked silently down her cheeks. Kiruna and Bera did not like you. Not at all. Remember what I saw around you? Women who can channel hurting you. It is the auras and the 13 and everything, Rand. It is too much. She always said her viewing always came true, though she could never tell whether in a day or a year or 10. And if you remained in Camelin, he thought it might be the day. Even with only a snarling in his head to go on, he knew Luz Theron wanted to strike at Mirana and the others before they could strike at him. For that matter, the idea appealed uncomfortably to Rand. Maybe it was only happenstance. Maybe his severe twisting of chance had worked against him. But the fact remained, Mirana had decided to challenge him on the very day the number of Aes Sedai reached 13. Rising, he strode into his bedchamber long enough to fetch his sword from the back of the wardrobe and fasten the dragon-shaped buckle. "You're coming with me, Min," he told her as he snatched up the dragon scepter and headed for the door. "Coming where?" she demanded, wiping her cheeks with a handkerchief. But she did follow. He was already in the hallway. Jelani bounced to her feet a touch more quickly than Baralna, a bony redhead with blue eyes and a feral grin. With none but maidens about, Baralna would stare at him as though considering whether to do him the great favor of doing as he asked. But he gave her a sharp stare of his own. The void made his voice distant and cold. Luz Theron had subsided to muted whimpers, but Rand dared not relax. Not in Camelin. Not anywhere near Camelin. "Baralna, find Mandera and tell her to meet me in Perrin's rooms, with however many maidens she wants to take." He could not leave Perrin behind, and not because of any viewing. When Mirana found Rand gone, one of them might well bond Perrin the way Alana had him. "I may not be coming back here. If anyone sees Perrin or Fail or Loyal, tell them to meet me there too. Jelani, find Mistress Harfor. Tell her I need pen and ink and paper." He had letters to write before he left. His hand trembled again, and he added, "Lots of paper." "Well, go! Go!" They exchanged one look and went at a run. He headed in the opposite direction, with Min almost trotting to keep up. "Rand, where are we going?" "Cairhien." With the void around him, that came out cold as a slap in the face. "Trust me, Min, I won't hurt you. I will cut off my arm before I hurt you." She was silent, and he finally looked down to find her peering up at him with a strange expression. "That's very nice to hear," she breathed. Her voice was as odd as her face. The thought of 13 Aes Sedai coming for him must have really frightened her, and small wonder. "Min, if it comes down to facing them, I promise to send you away out of danger somehow. I could anyone face 13. The thought made Luz Theron surge again, screaming. To his surprise, she flourished those knives out of her coat sleeves and opened her mouth, but then slid the blades back just as smoothly. She must have been finished before she spoke. "You can lead me by the nose to Cairhien, or anywhere else, sheepherder. But you better dig deep and try hard if you think to send me anywhere at all." For some reason, he was sure that was not what she had said. When they reached Rand found quite a gathering. On one side of the sitting room, they were wearing their shirt sleeves, cross-legged on the blue carpet and smoking their pipes with gall. A stone dog, Rand remembered from the fall of the stone. On the other side of the room sat Fail, also on the floor, with Bane and Chihat, who had also been at the stone. Through the open door to the other room, Rand could see Sulin changing bed linens, flinging them about as though she would rather rip them to shreds. Everyone looked up when he and Min entered, and Sulin closed his bedchamber door. There was a good bit of scrambling about once he explained about the 13 Aes Sedai and what Min had overheard. Not the viewings, though. Some in the room knew, not going to tell anyone unless she did. Which she did not, and not about Luz Theron, of course, but he was afraid of what might happen to him in the city with 13 Aes Sedai, even if they sat on their hands. Let them think he was panicky if they wished. He was not sure he was not. Luz Theron had gone silent, but Rand could feel him, like heated eyes watching in the night. Anger and fear, and maybe panic too, crawled outside the void like large spiders. Theron and Fail immediately began a hasty packing, and Bane and Chihat flicked fingers at one another before announcing that they meant to accompany Fail, whereupon Gall announced that he was accompanying Perrin. Rand did not understand what was going on there, but it involved a great deal of gall.
Yeah, my
Giat and them not looking at him. Loyal went running off.
passion fruit
as he thought about carrying
that was outside came down today, and it's in the dryer.
Famous walker.
And my brother's Panama Red came down today also. It's in the dryer too. Because we had two different, actually two different Herbs Now dryers.
Made out of red and white dresses. With her face fixed in that incongruous mildness, she
so I have one loaded up with
him and Perrin and Fael,
my outdoor,
lizard,
and then my brother
when they were all in
has the other one loaded up with his
my Lord Dragon,
his outdoor also, his
and a
Panama Red.
Amazingly, without a single wobble. The latter seemed to amaze her too. Mandera arrived at almost the same instant as Mistress Harfor, who was carrying a writing case with several steel-nibbed pens and enough paper and ink and sealing wax for 50 letters, which turned out to be fortunate. Perrin wanted to send word to Daniel Lewin, telling him to follow with the rest of the Two Rivers men.
Hopefully, because it pretty much filled up all the trays, 2 full trays.
Both Rand and Fael pointed out.
Hopefully,
in the first place, the Aes Sedai were not going to let them go, and in the second, it was not very likely they would want to. Perrin and she
it seems like it so far. See how it is once it dries.
Get on with becoming Aes Sedai. Fael herself had 2 hasty letters to write to her mother and father, so they would not worry, she said. Rand did not know which was which, but they were very different in tone. The one begun half a dozen times, then torn up, every word frowned over. The other dashed off with smiles and chuckles. He thought that must be to her mother. Min wrote to a friend named Mahiro at the Crown of Roses. For some reason made a point of telling Rand he was an old man, though she blushed at saying it. Even Loyal took pen in hand after some hesitation. His own pen, a human pen, would have vanished in his huge hands. Sealing his note, he handed it to Mistress Harfor with a diffident request that she deliver it personally if the chance arose. A thumb the size of a fat sausage covered most of the recipient's name, in both human script and Ogier. But with the one power sharpening his eyes, Rand noticed the name Aerith. Still, he showed no sign of wanting to wait and give it to her himself. Rand's own letters were as difficult as Fael's, but for different reasons.
But then I also have in my chest, and for my indoor, I have
that he had to start over more than once for ink blots.
a Bubba J.
He knew exactly what he wanted to say, though.
And Bubba J's feminized photo.
The reiteration of his orders.
And then I also have
and to Marana,
one called The Secret, which is an autoflower, also
there was no use
feminized.
him trying to hide. Lana could find
And they're
anywhere
both
in the
from
world eventually.
Aqua Genetics, based out of Canada.
If he could manage that. When he finally sealed them, the presence of a green stone seal carved with a dragon earned Mistress Harfor a stare, which she returned with the utmost blandness. Rand turned to Nandera. Do you have your 20 maidens outside? Nandera's eyebrows rose. 20? Your message said however many I wanted, and that you might not return. I have 500, and would have more had I not drawn the line. He only nodded. In his head was silence, except for his own thoughts, but he could feel Lews Therin inside the void with him, waiting like a coiled spring. Not until he had passed everyone through the gateway to the chamber in Cairhien, and let the hole close, cutting his sense of Alanich that vague impression of somewhere west. Not until then did Lews Therin seem to go away. It was wearied by grappling with Rand, the man had gone to sleep.
Let's do
At
one
last,
more
Rand
rest
pushed
stab.
Saidin away, and with that he realized how wearied he had been by the struggle. Loyal had to carry him to his rooms in the Sun Palace.
Marana sat quietly by the sitting room window, her back to the view of the street and Randall Thor's letter on her lap. She knew its contents by heart. Marana, it began. Not Marana Aes Sedai, nor even Marana Sedai. Marana. A friend of mine once told me that in most dice games, the number 13 is considered nearly as unlucky as rolling the Dark One's eyes. I also think 13 is an unlucky number. I am going to Cairhien. You may follow me as you can, with no more than 5 other sisters. That way you will be on an equal footing with the emissaries from the White Tower. I will be displeased if you try to bring more. Me again. I have little trust left in me. Rand al'Thor, the dragon reborn. At the end, his pen had pressed so hard that it nearly tore the paper. The last few lines almost seemed to stand from the rest. Verona sat very quietly. She was not alone. The rest of the embassy, if it could still be called that, sat in chairs around the walls in various states. Irritatingly, only Berenicia sat as small as Marana, plump hands folded in her lap, head bowed slightly and grave eyes watchful. She did not say a word unless spoken to. Fealdrin sat quite proudly and spoke when she wished, and so did Masuri and Raphella. For that matter, Cyanid appeared scarcely less eager, sitting in the chair, and often smiling determinedly. The rest were more like Valinda, almost placid. Everyone was there except Verin and Alana, and Gaidin had been sent to find them. Kiruna and Bera, standing in the middle of the floor, were most definitely there. That anyone could send such a letter to Aes Sedai disgusts me. Kiruna did not thunder. Her voice managed to be cool and calm and forceful all at once, but her dark eyes did provide lightning. Demira, can your informant confirm that al'Thor has gone to Cairhien? Traveling, Bera murmured in disbelief. To think that he would rediscover that. The bright beads in Fealdrin's braids clicked as she nodded. We can think of
Hell yeah, fire.
It will be well to
Get a call at the end, for tonight at least. I'll be on again tomorrow night. Might even do a gaming stream tomorrow. Of the new Assassin's Creed. See how it goes. Played a little bit of it. Definitely takes some getting used to. But I want to thank everyone stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by and chilling with me. Definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.